phone number. We are live.
Okay, we are live. This is Senate Finance. We are back from a break. And we are back in our own room. The exhaust smell has dissipated. And we're here to take up the House, and you do have a new number for it, H 807, 80.
It's H50, it's a committee bill number, but I would say that since we have not voted it out of the House yet, and you don't have custody of it yet, I will just say I'm here to talk about education finance.
Okay, that sounds good.
And to me, I mentioned a bill while I'm here.
Okay. So we are prepared when it comes to us, hopefully by the end of the week. Okay. We got language, all right.
So I'm Emily Kornheiser, I'm representative from Brattleboro, I'm chair of the Ways and Means Committee. I think you all know that. Spent some time in here before with you all. And here to sort of talk writ large about education finance this year and then dive in for a moment on a bill that is coming to you very shortly, H 850. So just sort of want to spend a minute level setting, if that's okay, about what we've been hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. So this year we've heard from school boards, from towns and cities across the state that they're struggling to create budgets that will meet student needs and that simultaneously are reasonable for taxpayers. It's not for lack of trying. School boards are working so hard for Vermont kids. Teachers are working so hard for Vermont kids. And we're grateful to them for their work. And for continually reaching out to all of us in that process as they struggle through. So we can find ways to help. And so my committee, and I imagine soon your committee, is going to be struggling with these two priorities: how to support Vermont taxpayers and how to support Vermont schools and children. And so how did we get here with these really significant projected tax increases? I think we all saw the December 1st letter. And it's an unprecedented year as we deal with the aftermath of the pandemic and other cost pressures. And I think in a more traditional budget year, each of sort of a dozen cost pressures would cause us to spend the bulk of the session discussing that single cost pressure. And this year we have at least a dozen of them. So why are tax rates expected to go up so much this year? Quite frankly, it's because non-property tax revenue is down and education costs are facing unprecedented increases. So when we go to spend more, property taxes go up if we hold everything else equal. So during and since the pandemic, the Ed Fund has had greater revenue from sales tax, right? And that essentially allowed us to lower taxes in the yield bill over the last few years, right? Even while education spending was increasing. And we were happy to do that. We wanted to return that money to taxpayers. That's sort of the bargain in the education fund. But that meant that this year, with that revenue gone, we're going to see our property tax revenue go up. Our property tax need for revenue go up significantly. In addition, the federal pandemic funds, the ESSER money, is gone, but all of the needs that the ESSER money was funding, absenteeism, mental health struggles, and learning loss, are absolutely all still there at the exact same scale that they were since the beginning of the pandemic and the ESSER money. We also know that real estate values have gone up tremendously, which grew our grand list, which means that rates can be lower, but that's then sort of made up for on the other end with the CLA. And I think that's really confusing. That's just adding more confusion to the mix. I wouldn't say it's increasing tax rates, but it's certainly increasing people's experience of their tax rates. And then there's all of the other pressures, right? We're seeing sky high healthcare costs across the board, and that's certainly not isolated to the education fund or to education costs. We're seeing sky high mental health costs at our district level, mental health needs, social worker costs, transportation costs, fuel costs. A lot of our schools have switched to wood boiler pellets, and even those costs are through the roof right now. And then speaking of through the roof, construction costs are up and construction needs are up. So, and it's not just PCBs, it's not just, something in the water, which we're seeing across the rate. It's also just like basic building maintenance has been postponed for so many years as we removed our responsibility from it. the general fund and the education fund's responsibility for school construction. That the level of delayed maintenance and the fraying infrastructure in our buildings has created significant added pressures at a time when construction costs are also through the roof. And so education spending, because of all those things, is expected to go up by an unprecedented $250 million statewide. And our offsetting revenue, like sales tax, is down compared to last year. As you might remember, in the yield bill that passed out of both of our committees and through both of our bodies, we actually set money aside for this year, tax rate offset reserve, I think it was called, something like that. And we did that knowing that this year would be something of a cliff, because we knew that those sales tax revenues would be going down, we thought costs would be going up. And we knew that the implementation of Act 127 would add some extra churn. And so we put that money aside. It was nowhere near enough. It is just a drop in the bucket of the challenges we're seeing right now. So in the face of all of that increase in education spending, increase in need, and increase in spending, sort of separate from the technical definition of education spending, the 5% transition mechanism cap, that 5% cap that we put into Act 127, which was designed as a transition mechanism for a fairly narrow slice of school districts. It was the districts that we thought would see the most reduction in their tax capacity as a result of 127. We put in this 5% tax cap, thinking that only a few districts who were having all of this churn and change would need to use it. But because of all of that other storm of spending and education and that increase in tax rates across the board because of all that spending, last time we heard an update from Nicole Lee at the Agency of Education about what warned budgets were coming in at, we now have information for every single warned budget in the state. That total is up another many millions of dollars, about 60 million over what the December 1st letter was. And that means that every single district in the state is now under that 5% cap. They've all hit that 5% cap. Every district. So it doesn't work anymore, right? So when everyone's at the 5% cap, it's not providing differential relief as it was designed to. And it also keeps us from being able to do other things with the education fund and the yield that we need to do in order to protect taxpayers across the state, because we've basically lost a lever. And so if we put money with that 5% cap in place, if we put additional revenue into the ed fund, it would just get sort of like eaten up by the cap. And if we put, if districts have a budget fail with that 5% cap in place, and they go to lower their spending in order to reduce their tax rates, because right, that's what towns do or budget school districts do when they have a vote fail, which is very likely in this environment. They will not be able to lower their budget significantly to make any difference in their tax rates at all. And so districts also don't have a tool available to them anymore in order to lower their tax rates enough to meet voters' needs. And so we've sort of come to the conclusion, later than I would have liked to, given that we're in the middle of budget season, but we really didn't, until we got those warned budgets 2 weeks ago, we really didn't have all the information we needed. It's become very clear to us across the board, and I think to most districts, that the 5% cap just absolutely doesn't work, and it isn't working the way we wanted it to, and we need to change it. But we made a promise in 127 that we would hold some districts to help them transition from the old weights to the new weights, and we would do that for 5 years. And so what our committee, the Ways and Means Committee has done, in like really deep collaboration with the Education Committee, they join us every Tuesday for the whole afternoon, and some consultation with our Government Operations Committee, is we put forward a proposal that we would transition from that 5% cap as a mechanism to a cent discount, which we've used before. So the way that would work is for every % reduction in tax capacity from Act 127 between, because of the change in the pupil weights, a district would get 1 cent off their tax rate. So it's a 1-to-1, you lose a % of tax capacity, you get 1 cent off your tax rate in the first year. And then we have that go down by 20% over 5 years, because we heard from districts that they don't want to find their own way through the transition. They really want us to build that step ladder, staircase or whatever, that off ramp for them. And so it steps down by 20% each year over 5 years until that cent discount is gone. We think in doing this, one, we've been able to bring up the yield a little bit, which is great. But more importantly, we've enabled districts to be able to modify their budgets. If a vote fails, so that they can bring their rates down. We've created a system, so we've changed the functioning, if this passes, of the ed fund back to its normal state. So that there's a linear relationship between revenue and taxes, so that we can put more revenue in if needed. Or we can change, the homestead and the non-homestead yield. We can just have things be in more linear relationship to each other. And in doing that, so that's the proposal. We moved from this 5% cap to this cent discount. But in doing that, we know that some districts would be sent into a bit, it causes a bit of a crisis situation in a state that's already a little bit in a crisis. We know that we're in the middle of budget season. And so we're saying to districts, if you want to change your budget based on this new information, you can. And so we've put in language in collaboration with Secretary of State's office and our Government Operations Committee to say, if you'd like to cancel your warned vote and warn a new budget and have a new meeting scheduled, you can do that. As long as your votes are completed by April 15th, so that we still have time to have all the information we need to set the yield. I'd also, while I'm here, just say usually we have pretty good, solid data when we set the yield on our side and send it to you. This year, you might need to do more updating of it than usual, and I think our conference committee on the yield will be more of a thing than it usually is, because we're gonna have changing information as we go, but that's the basics. We move from the 5% cap to the 5-cent discount, so we can raise the yield and restore the linearity in the ed fund. And in doing that, we're allowing districts to also change their budgets, rewarn their budgets if they want to, but they are not required to. And we set aside $500,000 to pay for any new costs related to that vote.
I have a question. I don't know if Senator Chittenden, I don't think he's where he can, he is. Senator Chittenden, you want to ask your question about the 500,000?
Representative Kornheiser, I just haven't seen the bill yet, so I apologize if this is obvious in the language. My question is, if a school district chooses to not revise their budget and instead go forward under the new removed 5% cap and let the voters vote on the ink on the ballots currently, and that vote fails, will they still be able to use the $500,000 that you've set aside in order to pay for the second vote that would happen after the failure of that budget vote on town meeting day?
No, the appropriation is for rewarned budgets and changed budgets in advance of this next vote. It's not for if a budget fails, as the language reads.
As the language currently reads. Thank you.
And the reason I'm sort of here in advance of the bill, which is very much not a thing we usually do, is because we very much want this to move as efficiently as possible so that districts will at least have some surety. My understanding in talking to the School Boards Association, the Superintendent's Association, to Nicole Lee and the Agency of Education, districts are really considering this very deeply. They're thinking about rewording their budgets. They're thinking about lowering their budgets in some cases, but they're not going to take any action until the bill actually passes. And town meeting is right around the corner, as you all know.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm here in advance. We're hoping to be on the floor with it tomorrow and put it in all stages of passage.
So we could get it Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay, and we've got Friday somewhat open. Great. So we hopefully we'll be able to go through it and if any issues come up, we can talk about them. Thank you. This is only dealing with the mess that got created by misinterpretation of 5% cap. And I've been writing back people telling them, how can I cap your taxes at 5% and your spending's going up 15 or 20%? where am I gonna get the money to pay the school? And that doesn't seem to have set in that we need to raise it. We need to find some new revenue source. Who probably not like being the revenue source.
The education fund's amazing in that it's this closed loop, right? And it means that it's closed loop, and when spending goes up, taxes also go up. For more of the details, you know, I just want to be clear for our committee, this is just the very first step. The second step we see as really doing significant work in the yield bill to make sure that we are protecting taxpayers somewhat from the immediate impacts of this. And then the third step, which our committee is committed to this session, is to really look deeply at our education finance system and see what we need to be doing differently. Both in terms of district level decisions and how the Agency of Education can better support those district level decisions. And the finance side to make sure, you know, that the voters understand what's happening, that folks, that we're all sort of on the same page with this work. And so we're really committed to that too, as sort of a third step. Julia, you know, Kirby has all the legislative language, Julia Richter has a number of really incredible modeling exercises and presentations related to the work that we've done that I'm sure she's happy to share with you. And Scott Beck is actually technically the reporter of the bill. But we'll get here too.
Okay, and this year, every year. The statewide, the rate gets set based on statewide spending. This year, if some towns go up 20% thereabouts, other maybe smaller, poorer towns vote to level fund or even decrease their budget, they're gonna see an increase because, and I think this year, it's probably the most acute because spending is going up so much in some places. And that there's an equity issue between rich and small towns that we haven't taken out by laws and pennies.
It's interesting how, you know, we say over and over again that all Vermont's kids are our kids, and the promise of the education fund is that it's a statewide fund. But I don't know if we're doing enough to help voters and the folks who are drafting budgets in individual communities understand how their decisions impact their neighbors and how their neighbors' decisions impact them. So I'm hoping we can do a better job with that.
I was gonna be also talking about how do we get information to voters about what's going on so that when they go to make their choice, they know that they're making a choice not just for their children, but for all the children in the state. And that's something we've got to get out there. And
Something else that I should offer is that through this process, there's been really incredible collaboration with the Department of Taxes, the Agency of Education, and the Secretary of State's office. And so there is already guidance available from the Agency of Education about exactly what the cent discounts would look like and what districts would be eligible for it. And that's really important, and sort of publicly available information for districts to see what the impacts would be for them of just this first step. You know, impacts will change as we take further steps. And then the Secretary of State's office is offering guidance with the School Boards Association about what sort of different voting procedures would be under this bill. So like if you already take a floor vote, then you would keep on taking a floor vote and how that would work.
did you get any information on when I went to my local school board? There's RIF requirements, and I think the drop dead date, at least around here, is something like March 15th. And if they don't know what their budget is, I guess I remember once it happened that everybody got a pink slip because you have to notify, which does horrible things to morale. And that's another just time factor that's playing in there.
There are districts, we did talk about that, there are districts that are already past the RIF deadlines. And so, one, we talked about how if districts do want to, you know, cancel their budget votes and rewarn in order to lower their budgets, in order to lower tax rates for everyone. There are quite a number of districts who have put money aside for capital costs. And so that might be the first place that they would remove from. And that part of this conversation is really moving forward in a significant way with the school construction task force's recommendations. So there's sort of a promise
Yeah,
that
we
there
are-
is hope in the other
We are
direction. I
moving
know you all talked
forward.
about that.
But we just don't know we're getting the 300 million,
No, so we don't.
but we are moving on that. Okay, committee, any questions? You understand what's going on? Okay, next question.
Thank you, Chair. I would just say that the districts that might want to continue forward with the budget as warned on the printed ballots, knowing that it might fail, they will likely fail because the 5% cap's removed. So I would just argue for those rewarned or the votes that they'll have to take afterwards to still be able to draw from the general fund $500,000 if a school district wants to continue forward and not rewarn or pull back the budget. It seems to make sense to me. The change we're making is still very likely to contribute to the fact that that budget might fail, and they should have access to the same pool that wouldn't necessarily put more pressure on their local budgets. But that's my understanding of the situation, what I'd press for, and I'd love to see the language that comes over.
I don't, did you get any information, where'd the 500,000 come from?
So we put aside money at some point in COVID times to allow all districts to, basically all votes in the whole state to do this, right?
People.
And so that was $1.5 million. And so we basically estimated that like probably this would be like at the maximum, this would be about a third of.
Okay, but we don't have any.
And so that's, and the Secretary of State's office thought that number was accurate and solid as well.
Okay, but I wish schools wouldn't put out the first budget. I wish they would do their best.
And we want to incentivize early decision making
Yes.
so we can pass a yield that is accurate.
Which is the other issue. If we don't have all the school votes in, we can't set an accurate yield. And that usually comes out in April once all the school budgets are in. And yeah, we need that in time to calculate for the July 1st, so. But as long as we're within that pool of 500,000, I don't know who is administering this?
The Secretary of State's office.
The Secretary of State's office, okay, so we could give them. First round, you get that, and second round, you see what's there, you divvy it up. as best you can.
You know, I think it's worth checking to see if the language is inclusive enough to see what's
Do that.
expected.
Take a look at that. Okay, any questions?
Just one of communication. People, to a large extent, don't really know what we're doing, and if they do know, they don't understand it. Have you done any written communication of any kind that would help explain that? Such as, what is it that we're going to do? Why are we going to do it? What's the logical or likely effect on your town, or how to find that out? And then how will it affect you?
So I have spoken to every superintendent in the state. I've spoken to the School Boards Association Legislative Committee multiple times. There's guidance going out from the Secretary of State's office and the Agency of Education that our committee has collaborated with them on. And I have, we have collaborated with Superintendent's Association and the School Boards Association and the communications that they're sending out to their members, as well as with the Clerks Association, who are also impacted by this. That's something the Secretary of State's office is helping with. And then between Representative Beck and I think we've sent out multiple notices to every House member for them to use in communicating and sharing information with their constituents. So I think for me, this is the most communicating I've done on any bill so far in my time as a legislator, and I'm aware it's still not anything close to enough. Because it's very complex stuff we're talking, it's both complex and complicated, and emotional, it's incredibly emotional.
It's their school, it's their kid. The biggest thing I'm getting, and this is mostly from one town where I think after I got my latest stack today, I'm up well over, I'm probably close to 200 communications in all forms. There seems to be an understanding that the 5% cap their tax rate overall, not just the impact of 127. And I've been asking, if your spending's going up 15%, how can I cap your tax rate at 5%? Where's the money gonna come from to pay the school? And it's that 5% cap that's been, like we were capping the tax rate. And I got a letter from a businessman today, and he's worried about the impact of doing away with the cap of his business. And I'm saying, you don't understand. If we don't do away with that tax, you're paying the difference between 5% and whatever the budget comes in, because it's going to the non-homestead.
And I don't know if you saw the memos from the Chamber of Commerce, but they are in, full support of us changing from the cap to incentive fund as well. And we took really great testimony today in House Ways and Means with House Education about the, what all of this work means for folks who pay on income.
That rises with the statewide average, right?
A lot of algebra that I'm not gonna try to do all that with you right now.
I thought
Madam
it
Chair.
didn't rise with the individual town, but if overall state spending went up 20%, then their rate went up.
It's actually both. So we can, I will encourage you to hear from Julia Richter about all of that
I'm
algebra.
sure we'll hear from Julie about everything. I'm also want to look into, because part of what is driving Stowe is that their second home rate is now below their homestead. And we knew that line was gonna cross 20 years ago, I think, when we did it. And I'm not sure, I'm looking at Senator McDonald to tell us what little lever, what we need to do and how. I don't want to do anything that's gonna have a huge impact this year.
It's really, we've been working on that in Ways and Means for a long time. And the problem is that the non-homestead rate is, includes apartment buildings
Yes.
and businesses and not just second homes.
Right.
And so, when we passed H480 last year, the idea was that it would bring us towards a grand list that we would be able to be more discerning about with our tax
And
rates,
that's what
but that's 2 years out. at
Yeah.
least.
And that, I think, is probably our best way to raise money. A significant, enough money to do anything with, but you've gotta have the information, you've gotta know who to send the tax bill to.
And we can't, I don't think we can punt this for another 4 years until we're able to implement that.
Yeah, I would just say, I think the new information that even Commissioner Bolio is acknowledging is that they have a very high compliance rate now with the landlord certificate. And the landlord certificate really tells you the difference between residential rental and residential primary. So I would still think that we could set something in motion this year that we know will provide some kind of relief next year. I wouldn't want to wait for a study to come back next
I
year.
don't think the tax department commissioner is gonna be overly enthusiastic about helping us raise taxes. So I think we may need to push on that information and see how much we actually need in order. Because I don't want to get the clerks angry at me.
I don't think he's getting enthusiastic this year or next year, so I just like to start that process.
Yeah, I
Getting
think we
comfortable
need
with
to
it earlier.
But it won't help this year.
No, and what we found last year is that because our grand list categories are so are consistently applied from town to town. What would even be within a non-homestead of what we might call, a second home in one community might be something else in another community, and so that was where some of the rub was.
Yeah.
But yeah, locally, it was all our.
It isn't, and
Second homes are non-residential property,
Yes,
so that's what they're called, non-residential property.
but there's multiple, what we heard last year was that there are multiple, properties that might be considered non-residential property.
Yeah, it's anything that's not a
it's not.
homestead,
Yeah.
is non-residential property.
Yes, but that includes multiple other kinds of
Like a
building functions. Or
The
commercial.
apartment buildings are non-residential property.
Yeah, but they are somebody's homestead.
They-
That's why we have a renter rebate program.
They're correct, that's why we have a rental rebate program. They're non-residential property and they have a rental rebate program.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
you were asked earlier about the non-residential property tax rate and the residential property tax rates, which go up and down with local spending.
Yeah.
It wasn't dealt with when Act 68 passed, and the notion was that we'd cross that bridge when we came to it.
We've come
It's
to-
crossed, it's crossed.
I know.
And back then, the discussion was that you would look at all the residential property from town to town to town to town to town, all of which have different tax rates. And you would, take an average of whatever they were for all the towns. And you would say that would be the non-residential property tax rate for the entire state.
And then it rose as the average
As
spending rose.
Right. I personally think if you said, this new rate applies unless you produce a landlord certificate, you're incentivizing putting forward your landlord certificate and then thereby taking out commercial residential rental from whatever you raise the commercial tax rate on.
We could do more.
that's a longer process with more
And
wiggles and
Yes.
shimmies than
Yeah, let's get
than
shimmy,
keeping it.
Yeah, I think we're getting into committee discussion.
Yeah.
We've got any more questions from Representative Cornhusker?
Just, can you share with us the documents that you sent to the House members with your explanation of how that would be helpful?
Absolutely. Then we'll have that.
I'll share them with everybody.
And we've got Kirby and Julia here. We've got a 5 o'clock meeting in here. For chairs meeting. So have you got anything to add to this, or would you be better off having you come back clean and start us through our deliberations?
Whatever you need,
Okay.
if you want to look at the bill now, or if you want the JFO presentation, or if you want to wait.
I think we should wait till we have an actual bill with actual voted wording before we go into dissecting it. Julia, do you have anything to share with us to help us understand what is going on?
I certainly can. I have a chart. I can talk through the mechanics of the discount mechanism. I think it's really, if you want to dive into the math today, I'm happy to talk about some of those details, whatever you would be helpful for the
Committee,
committee.
what would you like? Other than to go home?
It doesn't feel like it's gonna take 20 minutes.
No, I think it's gonna take a lot more. And again, this bill is just dealing with the 127 phase in. We are not doing anything at this point to look at the huge property tax increases. My concern is a concern for the schools and their needs to do good education. And I understand that's what they want. But I also have people who have a right not to be taxed out of their homes. And I'm trying to figure out how we do that balance.
And I'm hoping we can figure that out together this year.
I'm hopeful.
Can
So,
can I just ask?
Yeah.
Maybe go
What
through
the
this.
money is.
I remember at one point we were talking about 120 million, and then I heard you say 300 million today. And then,
it's
am I-
two, it's property, the spending is going up. I think I had two.
Yeah, so Julie Richter, Director Fiscal Office, I think that there were two numbers that may be conflated. One is the committee was talking a month or so ago of, given the data that we had at the time, the amount of additional revenue that would need to be put into the ed fund for the average bill change to be 5%. And that was the 120 million
Okay.
you're referencing. I believe the chair was referencing the difference between the education spending number, which is that total budget, less offsetting revenues, the remainder is education spending. So the chair was referencing that has grown by about 240 million from FY 24 to FY 25, given current projections.
So,
So if we were gonna try to close a gap.
Yeah.
The actual gap is $260 million or something.
to get us down to, did you say 5? I thought it was 120 to get us to 10.
So that at this point, that modeling is outdated because we have a lot more district budget coming in. So I don't have that number now. I haven't done that modeling. I could come back and talk to the committee if you had something in mind. the question is, when thinking about those flexible levers, is, are you going to be putting in a revenue stream that's not property taxes or increasing an already existing revenue stream in the ed fund? Or are you putting, increasing the liability on one class to protect a different class?
Okay, so it's complex and we've got a lot of work and I'm sure Ways and Means is already working. Because this is just the 127 phase in. This is gonna have minimal impact on actual school budgets.
In the grand scheme, yes.
In the grand scheme, I mean, this year, they're getting a complete discount. So they shouldn't play into this budget. Next year, they'll phase it in with 20%. But we still have all things, take 127 out of it altogether, we have historically high increases, and we are not seeing historically high revenue increases as we did during COVID. I mean, when we left here in COVID in June, when we were doing all the TV shows, the estimate was that the ed fund was gonna be $190 billion in the hole. Then all the federal stuff started to come in, and by September, the estimate was we would have a $60,000 surplus. So, huge changes there, and that stimulus money stimulated the economy, and we collected sales tax on it, but folks aren't buying washers and dryers and big screen TVs anymore, and we're back to normal.
And school spending continues to grow, so we're planning on sending you our work on that piece in the yield bill. If a different vehicle makes sense, please do let us know, but that is what we're planning to do. But we can't do any of that until this bill goes through and starts its work, or we won't really.
This is just to clean this, the field, so that we're all working on the same thing, and the people, because the people that are writing to me think that there was a 5% cap on their property tax, no matter how much their spending went up. And that's not what was intended. I think we have to take responsibility for perhaps not wording it as well as we could have. But it was the end of this.
I think we absolutely made a mistake, and we made a mistake in not being able to foresee this really perfect storm of school spending. If school spending had stayed at the same growth rate it was before, this would have worked fine, but.
5 was a nice cap, but.
Now we're
now
gonna
we're
come
looking
together.
at 18-20%. It's a whole different ballgame.
Well, thank you.
No other questions? Thank you. I think that's it for today. Those of you that aren't chairs can go home and get